Something significant is happening across the tropical Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico right now that every person living along the coastlines of the United States, the Caribbean, Mexico, and Central America needs to understand with complete clarity and complete urgency. Because the tropical activity that meteorologists, hurricane specialists, atmospheric scientists, and the professional community of weather forecasters who monitor the tropics around the clock, using the most sophisticated satellite technology, the most powerful numerical weather prediction models of atmospheric science are observing and analyzing right now is not the routine background level of tropical dangerous increase in organized tropical activity across multiple areas of the tropical Atlantic, simultaneously that has the meteorological community on heightened alert, and that carries implications for the days ahead that range from significant to potentially devastating, depending on how the atmospheric and oceanic conditions that are currently driving this explosion of tropical activity evolve over the coming hours and days in ways that the best available forecast guidance is tracking with intense professional focus and genuine scientific concern. The tropical Atlantic basin is currently displaying the kind of atmospheric signature that experienced tropical meteorologists recognize as the precursor to an active and potentially dangerous period of tropical weather development, a signature characterized by the convergence of multiple favorable environmental factors that together create conditions in which tropical disturbances that might otherwise remain disorganized and non-threatening have the potential to organize rapidly into tropical cyclones of increasing intensity, in which existing tropical systems have the potential to strengthen at rates that challenge the ability of affected populations to prepare and respond adequately, and in which the overall level of tropical threat to populated coastlines is elevated significantly above the baseline that the current stage of the hurricane season and the current position in the seasonal climate cycle would normally suggest. The sea surface temperatures across the tropical Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico, the fundamental fuel source that tropical cyclones depend upon to develop, to intensify, and to maintain their organized convective structure against the environmental factors that would otherwise erode them, are currently running at levels that are not just seasonally warm in the normal sense of warm summer tropical ocean temperatures, but anomalously warm in ways that reflect the broader pattern of above-normal ocean heat content that has been documented across the tropical oceans in recent years, and that represents one of the most important factors driving the trend toward more active, more intense, and more rapidly developing tropical systems that the scientific community has been documenting with increasing concern and increasing scientific confidence as the accumulation of observational evidence has made the relationship between elevated ocean temperatures and enhanced tropical cyclone intensity increasingly clear and increasingly difficult for even the most skeptical scientific voices to dispute. Ocean heat content, which measures the total thermal energy stored in the upper layers of the ocean to depths of several hundred meters rather than simply the temperature at the very surface that the most commonly reported sea surface temperature measurements capture, is particularly critical for tropical cyclone intensification because it determines how quickly a tropical system can deplete the warm water. It depends upon through the upwelling of cooler, deeper water that its circulation generates, with areas of deep warm water able to sustain tropical cyclone. Intensification through the upwelling process that would cool a shallower warm layer sufficiently to limit or halt intensification, meaning that the exceptionally deep warm water that the tropical Atlantic is current lie displaying in multiple areas of developing tropical activity provides an energetic environment that is highly conducive to rapid intensification of any tropical systems that develop and track through these areas of anomalously high ocean heat content. The atmospheric environment across the tropical Atlantic is simultaneously displaying several additional characteristics that compound the concern created by the elevated ocean temperatures, characteristics that together create a tropical meteorological environment of unusual favorability for tropical cyclone development and intensification that the explosion of tropical activity currently being observed is both reflecting and potentially amplifying through the feedbacks between tropical systems and the atmospheric environment they both respond to and modify through their circulation and their convective activity. Wind shear, the difference in wind, speed and direction between the lower and upper levels of the troposphere that represents one of the most important environmental controls on tropical cyclone development and intensification, with high H wind shear disrupting the organized convective structure that tropical cyclones depend upon, and low wind shear allowing that structure to develop and maintain itself without the disruptive influence of differential winds at different altitudes, is currently low across multiple areas of developing tropical activity in the Atlantic basin, creating the kind of favorable atmospheric environment for tropical development that meteorologists monitor closely because it removes one of the most important natural limiting factors on tropical cyclone formation and intensification. Atmospheric moisture the availability of water vapor in the mid-level troposphere that tropical systems depend upon to sustain the deep convection that is the engine of tropical cyclone intensity, is currently high across the tropical Atlantic in the areas where tropical development is being monitored most closely. Another favorable environmental factor that reduces the entrainment of dry air that would otherwise erode tropical convection and limit the ability of developing systems to organize and intensify toward tropical storm or hurricane intensity. The Madden-Julian oscillation, a large-scale pattern of enhanced and suppressed convection that propagates eastward around the globe on a timescale of 30 to 60 days. And that has been documented as one of the most important modulating influences on tropical cyclone activity in the Atlantic Basin, is currently in a phase that is favorable for Atlantic tropical activity, adding a large-scale atmospheric forcing component to the local environmental factors that are already creating a favorable environment for tropical development, and representing the kind of convergence of favorable conditions at multiple scales of atmospheric organization that experienced tropical meteorologists recognize as characteristic of the most active and most dangerous periods of Atlantic hurricane season activity. The specific areas of tropical activity that are being monitored most closely right now include several distinct disturbances at different stages of organization and at different locations within the Atlantic Basin, from disorganized but potentially developing tropical waves emerging from the African coast and moving westward into the open Atlantic, to more organized disturbances in the central Atlantic that are showing increasing signs of surface circulation development and convective organization around a developing low-pressure center, to systems that may already be approaching or have already reached tropical storm intensity and that are tracking on trajectories that bring them toward populated coastlines within the forecast time frame that represents the most urgent and most immediately actionable portion of the tropical weather threat picture that is now developing across the basin. Each of these areas of tropical activity must be monitored independently while also being understood in the context of the broader atmospheric environment that is influencing all of them simultaneously. Because the same favorable environmental conditions that are promoting development in one area of the basin are creating favorable development conditions across the entire basin, meaning that a period of intense tropical activity involving multiple simultaneous systems is only possible in the current atmospheric environment, but may in fact be the most likely near-term scenario based on the current state of the tropical Atlantic and the forecast evolution of the atmospheric and oceanic conditions that are driving the explosion of tropical activity that meteorologists are now watching with such intense professional concern. The forecast models that meteorologists are relying upon to project the development and the tracks of the tropical systems and disturbances currently being monitored are showing a range of scenarios for the coming days that spans from concerning to potentially devastating, depending on which of the model solutions best captures the actual future evolution of a complex and inherently uncertain atmospheric system, with the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasting model, the American Global Forecast System, the National Hurricane Center's own intensity and track models, and the ensemble prediction systems that sample the range of possible atmospheric evolutions, all showing solutions that need to be taken seriously by emergency managers, coastal residents, and anyone with interests or responsibilities in the zone of potential tropical impact over the coming days. The track uncertainty that is inherent in tropical cyclone forecasting, the cone of uncertainty that the National Hurricane Center uses to communicate the range of possible track solutions to the public, and that represents the real scientific limitation on the precision with which the future track of a tropical system can be predicted, even with the best available forecast tools and the most experienced human meteorological judgment, means that the specific communities that will ultimately be most directly impacted by the developing tropical activity cannot yet be identified with the precision that would allow perfectly targeted preparation and response, creating a situation in which a broad zone of coastal communities must prepare for potential tropical impact, while the forecast models work to narrow the range of possible track solutions as the systems develop, organize, and move into atmospheric steering, flow patterns that allow more confident track predictions. The intensity forecast challenge, the question of how strong the developing tropical systems will be when they approach or reach populated coastlines, is even more inherently uncertain than the track forecast challenge because tropical cyclone intensity evolution is influenced by a complex array of environmental and internal factors whose interactions are difficult to model with high precision even using the most sophisticated numerical weather prediction systems currently available, and because the potential for a rapid intensification in the anomalously warm waters that the developing systems will be tracking over creates the possibility of dramatic intensity increases on relatively short timescales that could transform a manageable tropical storm threat into a catastrophic major hurricane threat in a period of 24 to 48 hours that provides inadequate time for orderly large-scale evacuation of the most threatened coastal areas if the intensification occurs close to the projected time of landfall. The preparation actions that residents of the entire zone of potential tropical impact, which given the current level of uncertainty in the track and intensity forecasts, encompasses a broad swath of coastal communities across the Gulf Coast, the Atlantic Coast, and the Caribbean, should be taking right now, without waiting for the forecast to narrow or for specific watches and warnings to be issued, include reviewing and updating their hurricane preparedness plans, ensuring that their emergency supply kits are complete and current, verifying that they know their evacuation zone and evacuation route, confirming their intended evacuation destination, and ensuring that they have the fuel, the resources, and the personal circumstances to execute an evacuation on short notice if watches or warnings are issued for their area, reviewing the wind and flood vulnerability of their home, and taking any mitigation actions that are feasible within the available time, and monitoring the National Hurricane Center's advisories and local emergency management communications closely and frequently so that they receive updates about the evolving tropical situation as quickly as possible and have the maximum possible time to respond to any upgrade in the threat level that the developing tropical activity produces over the coming hours and days. The historical record of devastating tropical cyclone impacts on coastal communities across the Gulf Coast, the Atlantic Coast, and the Caribbean provides the most compelling possible argument for treating the current explosion of a tropical activity with the seriousness and the urgency that the favorable atmospheric environment, the anomalously warm ocean temperatures, the low wind shear, the high atmospheric moisture, and the favorable Madden-Julian oscillation phase together demand from every coastal resident and every emergency manager who understands what these environmental conditions mean for the potential for tropical cyclone development and intensification in the days ahead. The storms that have produced the most devastating and most lethal tropical cyclone impacts in the historical record of Atlantic hurricane activity. The storms whose names have been retired from the hurricane naming list because of the scale of the death and destruction they produced have in many cases developed and intensified in environmental conditions similar to those that the tropical Atlantic is currently displaying, tracking toward coastlines where the residents and the emergency management systems were in many cases not adequately prepared for the intensity and the scale of the impact that the storms ultimately delivered. A historical pattern whose recurrence, the current explosion of tropical activity and the favorable environmental conditions supporting it, make disturbingly plausible in the days ahead if the developing tropical systems follow the more concerning of the forecast model solutions that are currently being generated by the tools that meteorologists are using to project the future evolution of what is now becoming one of the most closely watched and most urgently monitored periods of tropical weather development of the current hurricane season. The scientific community's ability to detect, monitor, and forecast tropical activity with the lead time and the accuracy that the current level of atmospheric observation and numerical weather prediction capability provides represents an extraordinary achievement that has dramatically reduced the human toll of tropical cyclone impacts compared to the historical periods when storms could approach populated coastlines with little or no warning. But that capability only produces its full protective benefit when the warnings it generates are taken seriously, when the preparation actions it enables are executed with the urgency that the potential consequences of inadequate preparation demand, and when the individuals, the families, and the communities in the zone of potential tropical impact respond to the information they receive with the seriousness and the urgency that the explosion of tropical activity now occurring across the Atlantic basin and the devastating potential of what may be coming in the days ahead absolutely and unambiguously requires. Monitor the tropics closely, prepare your household and your community for the tropical impacts that the current atmospheric environment makes genuinely possible over the coming days. Take the preparation actions that could make the critical difference between surviving the coming days intact and experiencing the kind of devastating and potentially life-threatening tropical weather impact that the explosion of activity now occurring across the Atlantic basin has made a serious and urgent possibility for millions of people living along the coastlines that lie in the potential path of what is developing right now in the warm waters of the tropical Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. Like this video, if this analysis gave you the complete, urgent, and genuinely important understanding of why tropical activity is exploding right now and what the days ahead could bring for coastal communities across the Gulf, the Atlantic coast, and the Caribbean, subscribe to this channel for the kind of serious, scientifically grounded, and genuinely protective tropical weather coverage that the most active and most dangerous periods of hurricane season demand from anyone committed to providing coastal residents with the information they need to protect themselves, their families, and their communities from the devastating potential of what is now developing across the tropical Atlantic basin with a speed, a scale, and a favorability of environmental conditions that makes the coming days one of the most urgently important and most closely watched periods of tropical weather activity of the entire hurricane season. See you in the next one.